Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And today we're going to be talking with an entrepreneur in the growing and very rapidly growing field of home health care. I like to say, all of us baby boomers are getting older, and this is a service that is very much needed. And so please join me in welcoming Amrit Dhaliwal to our program today. Welcome, Amrit. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Deb. I'm very excited to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, as you can tell, he's not here in the States. He's actually in the UK. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But let me tell folks just a little bit about you. So Amrit Dhaliwal is the CEO of Walfinch, a leading UK home care franchise network. He combines business expertise with purpose-driven leadership to scale quality senior care while empowering his franchisees. Since founding Walfinch in 2019, he has built a growing network focused on wellness, technology, and community impact. So again, Amrit, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm excited to be on the show. I think there's lots of interesting synergies in what we both do, I think.
Great. Well, I always like to know from my guests, how is it that they got to where they are today? And according to your LinkedIn profile, you've had quite the varied but fun background. So tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I think since I was a child, I always knew I wanted to be in business. And I thought that I remember being 10 years old selling football posters in the playground and realizing, actually, hold on a second, this seems like an okay gig. And as I got older, that became something else and then something else. But I went to university, I read economics and history, and I was really adamant that I didn't want a real job, as I called it.
Corporate. We have corporate America. Do you have corporate England?
It's just the city, right?
Right.
Well, I didn't want to do the 9 to 5. I rather chose to do the 168 hours a week whenever I felt like doing them, right? So, and so I left university. I worked for about 8 months, and I realized that it just wasn't for me. I couldn't cope with clocking in and clocking out on someone else's time frame. And so I left that, and at that point I thought, well, what skill do I have? I don't have experience. I'm not particularly well funded, and I've never really run a business before. So I thought, well, I'll buy a bar, and I went.
Sounds like a good plan to me.
Yeah, well, hey, I can have some laughs with some people at the bar, and I was like, okay, great. So I'm looking around for a bar, and all of a sudden, this Italian deli falls out of the sky, and I went then to go and have a look at said Italian deli, and it was in this lovely English, very quintessential bit of sort of London, Surrey, called Richmond upon Thames. And gorgeous little place down this lovely cobbled street. Walk in there, and I thought, yeah, I think I could do this. I've watched Goodfellas. How hard could this be? And so the next thing I know, I bought this place and cobbled some funding together and so on. And I'm 22 years old.
Oh, my.
And I remember taking the keys and walking in on that first day and thinking, well, I don't know how to take the awning in. I'm not sure how the coffee machine works. Have I done the right thing here?
Oh, dear.
And that sort of fear set in at that point. Well, okay, I'll figure this out, and off we go. And so I started running this business, and I kind of got stuck into it, and things were going well. And then, as they do, I sort of hit that J curve and we were going around the top of it and downwards very quickly. I thought, oh, I have no idea how cash flow works, and and reinventing myself here. It was all very kind of scary. I think that first 6 months it was great, and then it started to taper off. And I thought, okay, well, and I remember reading Richard Branson's autobiography at the time, Losing My Virginity. And so I thought, right, I'll invest my way out of this like Richard Branson did. And so there was this empty property a couple of streets down, and I took that on, made it into a very Marie Antoinette looking tea room. And so, and just for context, I was a sort of amateur bodybuilder, competitive weightlifter at a time. At this point, I must have been 115 kilos, lifting. And so, you can imagine me sort of walking sideways into this tea room.
Right, into
and
a
it
tea
was,
room, a dainty
you
tea
know,
room.
with these bone china cups that I'd gone around looking and sourcing, and it just, the two things didn't really marry up for most people, and it was very comical actually, that I think back at it. And so I was building this business up, and I'm running both of them at the same time. And I thought, well, okay, flip the deli into more of a fine dining Italian restaurant. I was actually able to win some awards at the tea room. I then sold that, so I started it, built it, sold it all within the course of about 12 months, and then reinvested into the deli, making that a more of a fine dining Italian restaurant. But this created a new problem, because now I was working not just deli hours, which were essentially 9 to 5 and the odd evening. Now I was working basically all hours, and so that was less fun.
Especially as a young man.
Truly. And so in the midst of all of this, I had then met my now wife, my then girlfriend, and she's a dentist, very 9 to 5, and I was basically very 5 to 9. And we were on a Monday afternoon having our date night, because essentially Monday afternoons when the restaurant was closed, I was like, great, if I can keep myself awake, I can keep a relationship.
She worked late on Sunday.
And so we're sitting in this lovely cafe where we used to hang out a lot, and she said, have you ever thought about domiciliary care? And at the point I was about 25 years old. I was like, what the hell are the words that are coming out of your mouth?
Taking care of sick people? Old people?
I didn't even know what it meant. I mean, first of all, she explained what it was, and then I thought, what? But actually, interesting, at the time, my grandfather had come over from India, from Punjab, and we were taking care of him. We were sort of piecing this bit of care together for him at home, between my parents, myself, my sisters, and so on. And I thought, well, there's obviously a market there for that.
Right.
And I thought, my grandfather's very lucky. He's got his whole family here and in other parts of the world, in the States and Canada and so on. There's more family. I mean, he can really, he's very, and I thought, well, most people are not going to be in that situation. And so I decided to hop in my car, drive around the country, speaking to all different franchisors and saying, I'd be interested in buying a home care franchise. And so the next thing I know, I've bought a home care franchise. I'm living in Buckinghamshire, which was an hour away from my office in Oxfordshire. So I drove there an hour, did a 9 to 5, and then drove 3 hours to my restaurant, which I was also keeping spinning. Got there at sort of 8 p.m., worked there until 12, 1 o'clock, then drove an hour back home, and spent an hour on the phone to my then girlfriend, and got up early to hit the gym, and did that for about 18 months rather.
Wow.
And it was brutal.
Horrible.
Until the dom care business got to a point where I could sell the restaurant business and just focus on that. And this was sort of 2012, 2013. But really early doors, I realized this was the problem. Home care was archaic, and franchising was a bit archaic in the home care space. And I thought, that is what I need to fix. I need to support entrepreneurs to go from employment to self-employment through the power of franchising in this space, whilst transforming how we think about aging in the UK. And so that was my mission. And so I built that home care franchise up,
Mm-hmm.
sold it,
Mm-hmm.
and started Walfinch.
Mm-hmm.
So, that is how I got here,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
I love it. I love it. And I don't think I've ever met an entrepreneur that did one thing and stayed with it, right?
Yeah.
That sounds boring. Um, but the what I love is that each time you built on it, and all sorts of things, but you found your passion. And it's interesting because home care really isn't a lot of people's passion, caring for others. And I'm assuming you're not actually caring for people, you're more the management type. But it is it's a very special calling. Because you're caring for somebody's mom,
Mhm.
somebody's grandfather, and they would do it if they could, but they can't for whatever reason. But here in the States, I've been involved with working with senior living communities now for over 10 years with my business. And one of the things that is such a challenge is, there's not a lot out there, right? The home care is fairly limited. If you go into a care facility, so many times you think ick.
Mm.
And then you obviously have the higher end ones, but there's kind of a void. I really don't need a true full-time care facility. I want to stay at home, but I don't know how. So talk to us a little bit more about that, because that's the hole that you were filling.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've touched on such an interesting problem that we have. Now, I wrote a book that came out last year called Time to Thrive, the Home Care
Mm-hmm.
Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, I think, the opening paragraph is essentially talking about how we think about care. Now, if I have a PA, and so I can brag about that on a podcast, and, it's very cool. Great. She sorted out me being on this podcast. Wonderful. But if I had a carer, would I brag about that? And it's essentially the same
Right.
thing.
Yeah,
She'd be
because you'd be
supporting
saying,
me.
I need help.
Yeah, and so when I need admin help, that's something I can brag about. I
Right.
have 3 children, so if I have a nanny and I need support on that,
Right.
that's
But
something I can
I
brag about.
need help getting dressed or
But
whatever it
that's a
is.
whole different thing. And I'm no longer bragging about that. And yes, there's that
Right.
kind of independence piece and so on. But
Mhm.
it just really kind of got me thinking about the whole piece and the actual problem that we've got. The problem that we have is the way that we think about it.
Right.
It's an emergency
Mhm.
purchase.
Mhm.
It's never something that is planned for.
Right.
It's never really something that, I've taken thousands of calls and inquiries over the years personally.
Mhm.
And I don't think I have ever taken a call saying, "Hey, I think in the next 2 years,
Right.
my mum might need some care. I just wanted to have a
Want to
chat
check
with
this
somebody."
out. Right. Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
always an emergency
Right.
purchase.
They've had a
Um,
fall, they've
yeah,
gotten ill, whatever it is.
nobody calls you and says, "Yeah, come whenever you feel like."
Mhm.
They're like, "Can you come today?"
Right.
And so I think that whole piece is really interesting, of just sort of reframing the way we think about it and the way that the information is circulated. Because also, when you need to buy care, it's really hard to gain information. Most of the information that is out there is basically marketing slop. And it's not really something that is informative. And when it is informative, it's actually really hard to digest. And I think that all of those things form the problem. And so what ends up happening is people go deaf to it. And I don't want to hear that. I don't want to read it. I'm not interested. And when I need to worry about it, I will worry about it. And so part of one of my own missions is and our kind of strapline at Walfinch is redefining home care. And so we talk about that through this kind of rally cry of ours, which is Time to Thrive, where we think about aging as the next chapter, not the final chapter. So, we're right there with free community classes and activity classes and so on, and really thinking about, well, how can we reframe the way we think about aging, and how do we circulate information in bite-sized chunks so that when somebody does need care, actually they already kind of know us, and we've already, been a touch point for something else. And one of the wonderful things about the community classes is that your neighbor might be going there and they do not need care, but they are known to our world then, and so they can be the conduit with that information. And it's just thinking, well, what are all of the other touch points? I spend a lot of time on social media, which I got a lot of stick from my friends for. When I started putting myself out there. And one of my friends said, well, what is the point of this? And I was like, well, actually, it's all just part of the parcel, right? I'm not necessarily saying I'm going to take any more clients from this, but what I am saying is that I'm on a mission to redefine how we think about aging and how we think about domiciliary care as a whole, whether it's from the business side, or whether it's from the carer side, or whether it's from the client side or their families. And so one of the strings on that is getting out there, putting some rap music on my Instagram posts or whatever it might be, and just saying, well, who am I talking to, and am I actually speaking to them, or am I just stuck in my square box?
Right. And it is so true because you know uh, for the most part we do want to age in place, right? We want to age in our homes. Now we might need to downsize. It might be too big. We might need a place that doesn't have lawn care. All of those various things. But we don't want to go to a care facility.
Yeah. Dum, dum, dum.
And the problem is, at least here in the States, we're not really a culture of taking care of our elders. In so many other cultures, you might have 3 generations in one home. And we don't do that. And I'll be honest, I'm raising my hand on that one. When my mother, she passed away a couple years ago, and she actually lived completely independent until the day she died. But she and I did not get along. I mean, we were really good if there was a lot of space between us. But she fully expected that when the time came, I would go out there. And I'm like, but I have a home here and a husband. And,
Yeah.
and so my thought process had been, okay, I'll move to within 4 to 6 hours. Right? So I'm not the on-call person.
Yeah.
And I think it's that way because we still have our lives. But when I hear people talk about caring for their parents, there's 2 things. They're either angry about it, I'm stuck doing this, or
Yeah.
they see it as a blessing, right? And whether it's full-time care or just part-time. So we don't even know what we want. And then, the people who are needing a little extra assistance, they don't want to ask. They know their kids don't want to do it. And so then unfortunately what happens in most cases is they stay by themselves too long. And
Yeah.
then you have catastrophic things. And so I love what you do with home care, and especially your concept of thriving, right? A little bit of activity, a little bit of mental, all those various things can do so much for someone who is aging.
Yeah, I really, there's so many points there I think that are interesting, and the cultural piece and is so big. Maybe that's one of the reasons I took to this so passionately, because I'm Punjabi, and in that sort of Punjabi culture, we have a lovely word called seva, and that word means service, essentially, and not just to your elders, but to anybody. But we take sort of taking care of elders in a really serious
It's a
sort of
given.
way. It truly. And I remember for about 2 years, I lived in a household with 4 generations in there. It was my grandfather, my parents, me, and also my nephew lived there very briefly as well. And as wonderful as that is, obviously that has its own complexies.
A little
And
chaotic.
and great, and it's okay when you're 20, but less so when you're 30. So, but the point is, I think the way I think about this is, and the conversation that we often have at Walfinch with people that are looking for care or already in that flow, is it's about kind of getting back to being the child and enjoying a
Right.
parent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about being such a functional adult. I think we've kind of got this sandwich generation right now, and it's really interesting because they're stuck between taking care of their children and taking care of their parents,
Right.
and it's because we've had children at later ages and parents have kind of all of a sudden kind of hit that point, and so it's a really interesting thing because it's the bandwidth just isn't there, and so
Yeah,
I
because we
think
also want to work and have our own lives. And
exactly.
all those
And
things.
we don't have communities anymore where that works. There's not. It used to be. I mean, it's same with Indian cultures. Actually, it would have been 2 generations ago that my wife would be at home and taking care of my parents. But actually, fast forward to today, my wife is an entrepreneur and a dentist, and and has her own business and her own ambitions and so on. And so there is no one around. But also, we've got young children that require support and so on. And so you're already juggling, and so it's a really intriguing problem that we find ourselves in. And I think what we need to do is to create better quality care services in the home with great education to then say, well, they're great, you can take care of your mum, but at the same time, you're not doing the lion's share of it. What you're doing is the management aspect of it and so on. Also, I mean, gosh, I look at my parents and touch wood, they're fit and healthy, and hopefully they will be for a very long time. But I tell you, they don't want me doing their personal care. I know, and because I look at my parents, and you sort of look at them like they're lions, right? They've always been strong personalities and so on. They don't want you sort of taking that away from them in one sort of swoosh. It's a really interesting, complex dynamic, I think. But I think there is nothing wrong in asking for support, in really working towards that. And I think it's a really important thing. In fact, one of the sort of side missions that I have is actually bring this to the South Indian communities. And I speak a lot of kind of Indian languages. And so I'll often go to events and temples and so on and talk about care and receiving care and how it's okay. It's not wrong. It's not embarrassing. There's no guilt associated with it. And it's totally okay. There is no other way to function, or as you said, we get to a too later stage and then it's all downhill.
Right. It's interesting. There's a commercial on the radio station that I listen to here in Atlanta that's, one of their regular advertisers, and it is for home care. And the person, who is voicing it, she says, she noticed that her parents needed help, and she investigated this service, and she said, and so now I can get, excuse me, I can get back to what I do best, which is just loving them.
Yes.
And I love that thought process. So she's making sure that they're getting the care that they need, whatever level it is, in their home, because that was important to them. But then she goes back to being the daughter as opposed to the caregiver.
Yeah, I think that's it. And we're just loaded with so much guilt, and it's okay to not do that.
Right.
I think that's it. We just need to normalize it. And we have quite mature care markets around the world now, and we're now into sort of second, third generations that are receiving this. And I think we just need to reframe the thinking. If I look at the UK, I don't think the thinking's really changed in the last 20, 25 years around it. I expect it's probably not too dissimilar in the States. And so you think, well, gosh, something needs to happen, right? There needs to be a catalyst for change there.
Right. And like you said, it's been around for a long time. We haven't really, made the changes that are needed to keep people in their homes. Because 20, 30 years ago, you got sick, you went into a nursing home. That was it.
Yeah.
You got old, you went into a nursing home, and you might not have even really needed that much care, but you went into the nursing home. And as wonderful as many of those places are, it, they all have their challenges, right? And not the least of which is overworked and understaffed.
Yeah.
So, the people living there don't get the care in a lot of cases that would help them to thrive. But it's still trying to catch up. I mean, things are definitely different here in the States because, like I said, all of us baby boomers are getting older. And so in many cases, you can go from independent living to assisted memory if you need it, and then hospice in kind of the same communities. But that is still fairly unusual.
Mm.
But how do we kind of normalize, as you said, and speed up this process of thinking this is acceptable and this is okay?
Well, I think first of all, conversations like this,
Hmm. Hmm.
I look at the care communities around the world, and I don't think we're having this conversation. We're not necessarily talking about older people in a way that I think necessarily is respectful to them. I don't think that I'm yet to
Hmm.
meet someone that
Hmm.
is an older person that thinks they're old. So
Right,
no,
I
no one,
know.
right? You know, so I think we as care providers and business owners, I think we need to start
Hmm.
changing the narrative,
Hmm.
and I think there needs to be more
Hmm.
resources available
Hmm.
for that.
Right.
Thinking
Hmm.
about all the kind of mar and par
Hmm.
operations that are around the world,
Hmm.
maybe
Hmm.
getting those together and saying, well, how
Hmm.
can we help you?
Hmm. Right.
You're there, you're
Hmm.
providing this wonderful
Hmm.
service.
Hmm.
How do we help you to
Hmm.
sort of just start changing that?
Hmm.
Is the
Hmm.
funding going in the right
Hmm.
places? I think
Hmm.
often if you follow the flow of money,
Hmm.
you'll be able to then decide
Hmm.
what changes need to
Right.
happen.
Right.
UK, we
Hmm.
have a great system
Hmm.
uh, to when it works, that is
Hmm.
around the NHS
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
social care funding and so
Hmm.
on. It's never enough,
Hmm.
and that's part of the issue. Great, but also, what about if we started funding more of those kind of
Hmm.
free services and
Right. Hmm.
education
Hmm.
pieces, and so on, and really supporting business owners to say, can we start changing the
Hmm.
narrative? What about if GPs were
Hmm.
given KPIs in a very different way?
Right.
Right
Hmm.
now it's
Hmm.
about medications
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
closing chapters, but
Right.
actually, should it not be about mobility and muscle
Right.
mass
Yeah.
and increasing that?
Exercise, mental, all of those things. Hmm.
Totally.
Hmm.
What about if we started
Hmm.
thinking
Hmm.
about, well, hey, I've been looking at sort of grip strength
Hmm.
recently and
Hmm.
its association with Alzheimer's and
Hmm.
dementia. And I think, well, okay, so are we talking to people in their 40s about that now to say,
Right.
hey, this is preventative, right?
Hmm.
Let's
Hmm.
start doing some deadlifts over
Hmm.
here and increasing the grip strength
Hmm.
and so on.
Hmm.
It's really changing
Hmm.
conversation, taking the
Hmm.
conversation to younger people
Hmm.
and saying, this is how it impacts you,
Hmm.
because then it will get
Hmm.
reframed and it
Right.
will
Hmm.
start to make a
Hmm.
difference.
Right.
But when we're constantly targeting people in their 80s
Hmm.
with our marketing
Hmm.
material and our
Hmm.
literature, I think it's too late
Right.
at that point. The
Hmm.
change
Hmm.
happens with their
Hmm.
children.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, I'm the target market.
Yeah,
Even though my parents have passed, a lot of people who are my age, they do still have parents. And I think, of course, one of the biggest conversations, at least, that I have seen, is that little thing called guilt.
yeah,
My there was a big age difference between my parents. My father was quite a bit older than my mother, and my mother was very headstrong, if you haven't already figured that out. And she was going to take care of him until the day he died. I mean, that was her. I'm going to do this. Well, they lived in the mountains of Colorado. The
nice.
closest doctor was 65 miles away in Wyoming.
Oh,
Oh yeah, in a different state. And all of those things. And unfortunately, he got Alzheimer's. And I'm not always the best daughter in the world, and so I didn't go visit as much as I should have, and all of those things. And one of the things that we discovered was my dad was falling almost every day. He was just falling. Now he is this tiny little frail thing, but there were a couple of times where my mom couldn't get him up.
yeah,
And so she had neighbors, she had friends who would come in and help. But of course, my fear was that he would fall and take her down and she would get hurt. And then I'd have
yeah,
two of them, right?
Yeah.
And so he had fallen and was in the hospital, and she was bound and determined she was going to take him home. And I knew she was not going to listen to me. There was, and so I took their doctor and the social worker from the hospital aside, and I said, we need to have a conversation. And because they were, happily content to send him home,
Yeah.
because that was what my mother wanted. And I said, you remember he lives 65 miles from here. And, and so they told her, you can't take him home. You cannot do that.
Mm.
As much as you want to care for him, he needs more than you can do. And so then it was not her decision, and she was fine with it, but yeah, the guilt of, we need to either care for our spouse, our partner, or our parents. I think that guilt can just be overwhelming.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting piece, isn't it? Because what do we do about the guilt? There's support services, but they're poorly funded.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Do they have really professional
Mm-hmm.
psychiatrists involved there? Because actually, I'm in the situation. I'm in the business. I get it. I see it all the time. If my parents needed care, I would feel lots of guilt,
Mm-hmm.
and I know, and I believe, but I still would feel that guilt. But what are we doing as a community to change that? And I think that's where the issue lies. And I think, really supporting families through that, because it's a journey, and really supporting them through that journey
Right.
with professional help to say, it's okay.
Right.
You're not doing anything wrong here. You can, actually, it's the other way. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
accept the help,
Right.
you'll be doing something wrong here. You'll
Right.
be putting someone in danger and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that whole piece. I think it's all well and good reframing the conversation, but actually, what are we? Where are we putting a hand in our pocket and doing what? And I think that's the piece. That it's understanding where the funding is going, and if it's not going in these sort of places, we're not
Right.
making impact.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and that's wherever you are in the world. And I mean, and not to get political, but I mean, the thing that we are definitely seeing is a bigger divide with people financially. You're very well off, and then you're not. The middle is kind of going away, and so that's where a lot of this comes in, because people are like, well, we don't have the money. But I think the thing that is so wonderful about home care is it is obviously a very different financial undertaking, as opposed to the several $1,000s, if not more, in a care facility. If you've got somebody coming in every day, every other day, for an hour or two, maybe more, depends on the need, that is a very different financial outcome.
Yeah, totally. Actually, it's very affordable when you look at the whole piece. It is much more affordable a conversation to be having than having someone in a care home facility and so on. And it gives more longevity to the solution, in fact. And I think one of the other issues that you've got is often there's not enough longevity to the solution, and that is because people run out of financial steam, and that's a real thing. What can you do with that, right? It's if you've run out of money, you've run out of money, and that is it.
And there's a different care level then at that point. It's kind of this middle ground where it's like, well, now what the heck do we do?
Yeah.
And one of the things when I was looking through your website, and we've already talked a little bit about this, is being active and thriving. And you place so much emphasis on, how do we combat loneliness? How do we make sure that people are more physically fit? And, and obviously that can be done at home, but tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, what we've done is really think about the whole piece. So one of the pieces that we've worked on is working with the right kind of charity organization. So really think about, does it fit everywhere? So the Royal Osteoporosis Society is our charity of choice, and so that's really talking about, well, actually we can fix this problem. Our community classes that we have are called Thrive Clubs, and so they're free clubs around the country. And an hour at a time, and anyone can drop in. Invariably, it's older people that do drop in, and they might be exercise classes of different different denominations, whether it's yoga or Pilates or, a general PT coming in. It might be an art class or another activity with flower arranging and so on. So that hits a few different things. It hits loneliness and it hits the piece around the actual activity bit. And then there's a lot of education work that we do. So whether, I have a whole YouTube series called Wellness with Walfinch, and it's where I meet various different personal trainers and, various different people. And we do exercise classes together that care workers can follow along at home with and so on with their clients. And so it's really kind of putting all of the different bows together and saying, well, okay, actually, we've got education, we've got the actual thinking and that brand piece, we've got the public speaking and really kind of getting that message out there. But then the delivery of it, it's really thinking, how are we training the care worker? What are we saying to them? Are we saying that Mrs. Jones, if she's struggling with her buttons, just do it for her? Or are we saying, well, give her a minute? Are we saying that it's okay for Mrs. Jones to stay in bed? Or are we saying, hey, let's really try to motivate her to just get out and go to the loo on her own and so on, take a step and so on, and safely, etc., etc. And so it's really kind of thinking about that and just think about the whole thinking behind it. And even when to the point where Walfinch is a franchise business, and when I'm talking to prospective franchisees, I'm really thinking about who is the right kind of franchisee that will understand this messaging and actually take it somewhere. And I think that's for me the kind of key piece.
Right. Yeah, it's one thing to be a McDonald's franchisee, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and so I want to talk more about your business. First of all, the name. I read on your website. I know where the name came from, but tell us more about that because I thought it was very sweet.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really funny thing. I've always been terrible about naming things, I've got to say, and so I kind of looked at Wolfinch and I thought, well, I'm this care business, and what do we do with this, and so on, and interestingly, what ended up then happening was I sort of worked with this branding agency and said, well, help me come up with something that is not going to be taken. I don't need to worry about trademarking all around the world and all of that kind of thing if I want to go abroad and so on. And I thought, well, maybe a combination of two things. And they came up with lots of different things. And Walfinch really stood out to me because the first part of it comes from my surname,
Right.
Dhaliwal.
Comes from your last
Uh,
name.
and the second part is talking about that evolutionary bird. And I'm thinking, well, how that change and evolution with the finches happened. And I thought, well, gosh, that really resonates with me. And thinking about how we're going to transform and, really think about, well, actually, the core is the same, but the messaging is all different and the delivery is different, and really it is evolution, I think, because a lot of care businesses have been around for 20 plus years, which is wonderful, but it means it's much harder for them to change. So if we just come in with a very different kind of way of thinking and a story and so on, and so and that's really where the name comes from.
Right. Well, and I love on your website you talk about a finch is, when a finch is ill, which I'm not sure how you would know, but they actually become more social. So they're
Yeah.
relying on their community. And I think that's what all of this really comes back to is as we get older, and especially if we're not as healthy as we have been used to, we withdraw. We can't go out. We're afraid to go out. We might fall. All of those various things. And what we really need to do is have our community around us. And that's family, that's caregivers, that's, the other people at the classes, all of those things. And so I love that this is really a big part of what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really at the heart of what we do because it's really easy to just say, hey, I'm just going to provide care. But actually, the hard part of it is to say, well, what else are we going to do? Because a care bit is kind of standard. Everyone's providing care. That's open and shut. but then what?
Hmm.
You know, and I think the then what
Hmm.
for me is quite
Hmm.
interesting.
Right.
I'm particularly intrigued by
Hmm.
that.
Hmm. Right. And it is so interesting, to keep people involved. I mentioned my mother, and it's been a little over 2 years since she passed. She was very active. Now she was almost completely blind, and so she did have, my aunt and other people who cared for her. But she went to Walmart. She went to
Yeah.
lunch. This is all the day before. She went to all of these various things, and the next day she had a cardiac event and was gone by noon.
Wow.
I mean, it was like
Yeah.
poof. Um, and I tell people that was her choice. I mean,
Yeah.
that would have been exactly what she wanted. In fact, we were in Las Vegas. They had to call us in Las Vegas and say, and but she now the nice thing was she did have community. When my aunt and uncle were not able to, or unavailable to care for her church, things like that. And so she knew to reach out to the community, but it was still very hard for her to ask for help. And I think that's a lot of what this comes down to is we don't want to ask for help. And we've been kind of talking about that. We don't want to say, things are a little bit different, so I need help. There's just something about that we don't like.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting piece. We do not like it. You know,
Mhm.
we don't
Mhm.
like asking for
Mhm.
help. And I think you just sort of summed it up very beautifully there. You know, that's how I'd want to go. I don't want this kind of long drawn out illness. I'm super busy and
Mhm.
super, on the move,
Mhm.
and you kind of want to,
Mhm.
hopefully, in a very long time from from now, you want to go out with a bang, because actually also it's the way that people then think about you as well,
Mhm.
and also I think it's okay to talk about it.
Right.
It's when we don't, and it's I think in Australia and New Zealand they have a much healthier
Mhm.
relationship
Mhm.
with talking about death.
Mhm. Mhm. Right. Yeah, it was funny. My mother, being my mother, had her service written out. She
Yeah,
and had it for years, right? It made it very easy for me. But one of the things she said was, she had the list of music that she wanted at her
yeah,
service. And one of them was the Frank Sinatra version, and it quite literally
nice.
said that of I Did It My Way.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah,
unfortunately, the church wouldn't do that. They said, no, it has to be religious. And I was kind of annoyed.
yeah,
I thought, I'm paying you a lot of money. But that really was it. How can we live the way we want to live for as long as we can?
yeah,
And I mean, I work with senior living communities where the residents are very active, very healthy. Maybe it was just they didn't want to live in their home any longer, whatever it
yeah,
was. And so it's still a very good thing. But, yeah, people still want to live in their home. They don't want to get up unless they want to get up. They don't want somebody telling them what time is lunch, all of those things. And so, as long as they can stay in their home, the better it is.
yeah. And I think that's it. And I think that there's a correlation between that longevity piece and being at home,
Mm-hmm.
and so on, because actually you have that one-on-one support,
Mm-hmm.
your
Mm-hmm.
surroundings. I think often you've got some sort of support
Mm-hmm.
mechanism, whether that's a postman or the neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't have lots of friends and family, there is some level of support mechanism there. Not always, but if you're fortunate that does exist. And I think there is a real
Mm-hmm.
beauty in being able to age at home, and for me, I think that is something that we really need to talk more about
Mm-hmm.
as a community,
Mm-hmm.
and more openly from a much younger age,
Right.
and
Mm-hmm.
really kind of thinking
Mm-hmm.
about that, and
Mm-hmm.
truly be shouting, at the rooftops about
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And here in the States, one of the things that, especially in the big urban areas, you can go into a community starting at about age 50, right? And so
Yeah.
it's a duplex, cottage, home, all of those things. And the nice, you don't have to mow your lawn.
Yes.
You've got
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that taken care of. And then they have the transitional care,
Yeah.
and so you can stay there, in some form or another until the end. And again, that's a higher end cost.
Yeah.
That's going to be, but yeah, and I think it is because there's so many of us baby boomers that we want that, but I don't want to have to mow my own lawn. And so it's just kind of one of those things that is slowly happening.
Yeah, and I think it's really accepting it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just
Right.
accepting it and
Hmm.
planning for
Hmm.
it. And
Hmm.
it's just another
Hmm.
part of life. And actually one of the things I'm really interested in starting to think about and talk about is, well, how are we financially planning for
Hmm.
aging?
Right.
Because we're not,
Hmm.
a
Right. We've
pension
got
isn't
long-term care insurance, but that's different. Hmm.
yeah. And that's it. And
Hmm.
also pensions are
Hmm.
just groceries and mortgages and,
Hmm. Hmm.
survival.
Right.
But
Hmm.
what about the actual
Hmm.
care element, which
Hmm.
might cost upwards of
Hmm.
£100,000, dollars,
Right. Hmm. Hmm.
etc.
Right.
And it's well, and really thinking about
Hmm.
that and
Hmm.
how we pay for that
Hmm.
and what that looks like, I
Hmm.
think is a really important thing.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
in fact, with my own children,
Uh-huh.
I've started putting a fund
Hmm.
together now,
Hmm.
thinking, well, when they are in their 80s,
Hmm.
if, even if you
Right.
sort of have a small
Hmm.
increment of
Hmm.
£50 a month,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
for 80
Hmm.
years, well,
Right.
actually, that
There's
really looks like
compounding interest.
there's some serious
Hmm.
compounding and it's magical at that point.
Hmm.
And then you think, well,
Hmm.
gosh, what if the government got behind a scheme
Hmm.
like this? And
Right.
then it looks
Right.
really
Hmm.
interesting, right?
Hmm. Or companies. I mean, we've done 401ks, we've done all sorts of
Yeah.
things like that. And it's funny because maybe it's just that I haven't come across it, but I don't recall financial planners talking about things like this.
Yeah.
And it's more the extreme. It's the okay, you have to go into a care facility, not the mid-range of home care.
Yeah.
And so yeah, planning for that I think is something that is very critical.
Well, and I think that is it, but isn't it? I mean, it's not a sexy thing to be talking about or to be involved in. Hence, why no one really bothers with it.
Mhm.
And you know, I think that's I was doing talking about compounding. I was doing a compound interest calculator on, well, if you had £50 or dollars at 5% over
Right.
80 years,
Mhm.
80 years
Mhm.
with £50 every month
Mhm.
or $50 every
That's a
month
chunk of
again.
change. Mhm.
I mean, it's six or £700,000, or dollars, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But basically, it is enough to support your older age, for sure.
Mhm.
And then if you've got kind of, you alongside that dollar cost averaging, you've got an employer that is also
Mhm.
contributing to
Mhm.
that.
Right.
Like in the UK, we've
Mhm.
got pension schemes
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
401ks in the US and so on.
Mhm.
I mean, all of a sudden, that
Mhm.
starts getting
Mhm.
super
Mhm.
interesting. But I
Right.
think I think it's about putting that whole thing together and saying,
Mhm.
well, how does it look,
Mhm.
and do we understand it? Does it make sense, and
Mhm.
so on? Because it's all good and well talking about all this stuff, but
Mhm.
unless there is money behind it, it
Mhm.
won't work.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
all good and well talking about
Mhm.
care facilities
Mhm.
and private
Mhm.
pay and being at
Mhm.
home and receiving medical
Right.
care at home
Mhm.
and so on. But it
Mhm.
all costs
Mhm.
money,
Right.
and that is a harsh reality
Mhm.
of it.
Mhm. Right. And then you add in those things like, is it taxable income? And that's going to vary from country to country. All of those things. And and then you've got people that, well, they want to leave it for their children.
Yeah.
Now, my mom, God bless her, she spent, and that was okay. But like she would take us, she took my husband and I to Scotland and Ireland. She took us on several cruises, and she would say, "I'm spending your inheritance." And to me, that was the best thing possible, right?
Yeah.
And I have a brother-in-law that says, for him, the best thing is you write your last check to the mortuary and it bounces. Right? But
Nice.
but in other words, how are you living life to the fullest?
Yeah.
And I think that is the issue because we have so many people who, for whatever reason, go from okay to uh-oh.
Yeah.
We've been talking about that, and really it is things. Now I am a lazy slug. I'm not getting as much exercise as I should, but things like that now. Get out and walk and read and put your stupid phone down.
Yeah.
All of those things are going to help us as we get older.
I think this is it. It's really about changing the way
Mhm,
we think about it
mhm,
all and actually
mhm,
being way more
mhm,
purposeful.
mhm,
And yeah, interestingly, the last 18 months, I've been
mhm,
hitting the gym much
mhm,
harder than
mhm,
I have done in the previous couple of
mhm,
years.
mhm,
And I was talking to a friend of mine
mhm,
recently, and he was saying to me, "Why is it? Is it the aesthetics?" And I was like, "No, the aesthetics matter.
mhm,
Absolutely. We can all do with
mhm,
losing a couple of kilos and
mhm. Oh, yeah.
putting on a bit of muscle."
Mhm,
But actually, what I said to him was that I've really been
mhm,
thinking about this. I turn 40 next year,
mm.
and so I've
Oh, you're
been really
just a
thinking about it.
baby.
Yeah, well, exactly. But 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 actually,
Right.
how do I use the energy
Mhm,
and all of that I've got right now and drive that forward and say
mhm.
what good habits can I
Right.
be putting into
Mhm,
play
mhm,
today
mhm,
that will
mhm.
service me
Right.
and
Mhm,
serve me well
mhm,
later in my
mhm.
70s and
Right.
80s,
Right.
because actually
Mhm,
it's about being
mhm,
purposeful about it.
mhm. Right.
What are the
Mhm,
supplement
mhm,
intakes and so on, but
mhm,
actually, and then changing the way we talk about that as
mhm.
well with everybody
Yes.
else, I think.
Yeah. We talk about old people.
Yeah, yeah,
And I prefer the term mature, except I'm not
yeah.
mature, right? I'm going to be as silly as can be, but yeah, I mean, just the words that we use. I always laugh when I see the things on Facebook that say, I used to look at somebody like that and think, oh my God, they're old, and now I realize I'm that age.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that's true.
It's
And
very true.
when I tell people my age, now the nice thing is they're very polite and they say, "Oh, you don't look that old." But yeah, old is okay. I tell people, it's better than the alternative, right?
Absolutely,
Mhm, mhm,
absolutely. And I think that's it. Really,
mhm,
it's just it. I've said it a number of times, and I'll say it again. It is just about reframing the way we think about it, and if we can do that en masse,
mhm,
we're doing well.
mhm. Right. And again, thinking, okay, we can do this where people are staying home and we're caring for them at an earlier point
Mm,
so that it is, something that's going to be beneficial.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's it. It is about getting involved
Mhm,
at an earlier point when
mhm,
it's just about companionship.
mhm,
It's about, well, oh, I've
mhm,
lost my spouse and so
mhm,
on, and I don't need
mhm,
care, but what I
mhm,
need is a
mhm.
friend,
Right.
and can we be involved in that?
Mhm,
And I think if you can engage at that point,
mhm,
however that might
mhm,
look,
mhm. Right.
I think it can really serve you well
Mhm.
later.
Right. Well, and obviously, being I have a friend who is almost 80. She might actually be more than 80. She is a mentor to junior high students. Can you
Yeah,
imagine?
yeah,
And she says that's what keeps me young. We It's election time here in the States, and so I went down to do early voting yesterday, and none of the volunteers were under 70 years old.
yeah,
They were so obviously, they were volunteers. But, and the nice thing is, I mean, people are working
yeah.
longer. Sometimes they have to, sometimes it is totally by choice. But yeah, it's getting more commonplace to see things like that and to see them in a positive way.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's it.
Mhm,
It's reframing the
mhm,
thinking. It's
mhm,
also then talking about it the whole
mhm,
time and
mhm,
saying, "Hey, what are we doing
mhm,
here? Are
mhm,
we are we
mhm.
are we being real here? And
Right.
actually, or is it are we just kind of going with the
Mhm.
flow? And this is just how
Right.
everything has always been
Mhm,
said and
mhm,
portrayed, and so we're
mhm,
going to continue with that."
mhm. Right. Well, oh my gosh, we've only got about 5 minutes left, and I want to talk a little bit more about your business. Now, you are only a franchise in the UK, might
Mhm.
change. But, for anyone who is an entrepreneur thinking about doing franchising, what tips do you have for them?
Yeah, I think franchising is a great place
Mhm,
to get involved in
mhm,
business, whatever discipline
mhm,
that business is. I think with care in
mhm,
particular,
mhm,
franchising is a wonderful way
mhm,
to dip your toe into it.
mhm,
We've got some franchisees that are doing just making huge impact, but also at the same time making a wonderful living for themselves. I think our top franchisee might do over £4 million in revenue this year, and so I mean it's quite significant numbers. So for me, I think the power of franchising in the space of home care is quite remarkable. There's very few places that you can come in with a 100-odd thousand investment and 8x your money in 5 years. It's really quite an intriguing place. So, I look at Walfinch and I think, what does that look like in 5 years from now? We'd like to get to about 100 units around the UK, and start thinking about international expansion. In 10 years from now, we'd like to be in over 200 locations, have international growth.
Your king did just visit here. I mean,
Well, exactly, and so, maybe now is the time to launch it, actually, as a result of that. So, you sort of jump on that bandwagon. But no, and I think it's a super, super interesting market to be in. And I think even if you're not from this background, which most people that come into home care are not, I think it's a great place to really think about using your management skill, your business acumen, your sales background, whatever it might be, and really kind of saying, can I filter it into this?
Right. Well, and of course, the good thing about buying a franchise is you've got that corporate structure supporting you. You don't have to come up with your marketing. You don't have, all of that is already done. And I think that's what, the downfall of many entrepreneurs is, they're like, payroll? I have to do payroll? Wait a minute, I have to do a marketing brochure? No, that's taken care of with a franchise.
Yeah, it's all of those systems, and I think that's the real beauty of it, that you're getting into this kind of plug and play model, whatever it might be. So I think it's a very cool sector to be involved in.
Right. And speaking of that, you have been recognized in the industry as a top leader in the care sector. What are some of the skills that you think have led to that recognition?
Yeah, it's a really humbling feeling, actually. What I often talk about is just consistently doing the work, whatever the work is. It's just keep your head down and just keep doing it, because I don't care if that's you trying to lift more pounds in the gym, or whether you're trying to build more pounds in the bank. Both of the things, whatever it is, it's all about doing the work and doing it consistently, doing it for a long period of time. And everyone always thinks about that overnight success, but no one ever thinks about the 10 years it took to get to the overnight success. And I think it's that, it's quietly doing the graveyard shifts when no one else is looking, and saying, well, great, if you can outstrip and outwork everyone, you'll always be ahead. And this is what I always say to my franchisees. If you can work one press up harder than the person next door, you will come out on top, without a shadow of a doubt. It's not about skill and talent per se, but it is about, how long can I just keep going? It's an endurance test, I think, running a business.
Right. I love it. Well, we will have links in the show notes to your LinkedIn profile and to your business. And so people will be able to find you there. This has been absolutely delightful, and I would love to chat with you again, because this is going to keep growing. So, when you decide you're going to be here in the States, then we need to chat. Hopefully that's not too long from now, right?
Yeah.
But until then, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
I think about your own wellness journey and think, well, actually, what is it that I want to be able to do at 90? Is it tie my shoelaces? Is it play with my grandchildren? Is it play golf? And think the work that needs to go in today, build double as much muscle mass that is required for that activity, because there will be a deterioration. And so when you are in the gym or whatever sport it is that you do, and if it's not, then let's think about something. Is it walking? What is it? The activity that you are doing today, how does it feed me when I'm 90? And I think that it just changes the way we all start to think.
I love it. I love it. Well, I'm Deb Creer. I've been having so much fun chatting with Amrit Dhaliwal. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.